Hello, welcome to History in Lowell with me, Maritza Grooms, and my buddy, Bob Forrant, professor at UML. Today we have a special guest, Mimi Parseghian.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, good.
Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So today we'll be talking about Armenian immigration into Lowell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you are an Armenian-American.
Correct.
Yes. So let's start from the beginning, right? We've talked about different groups coming in and what brought them here, when they came, and how their experience has been in Lowell. So wherever you'd like to start.
Yeah, I think I have to give a little bit of history about Armenia because we came from France. So people would say you're French. Oh no. My grandparents were survivors of the Armenian genocide. And after they left their homeland, they went to Syria, like most refugees, you travel. My mother's side, they went from Syria to Lebanon, then to France, to refugee camps in France. My father's side went from their homeland to Greece, to Albania, back to Greece, and then again to Marseille, France, another refugee camp, and my parents met there. And then we came here because my mother's family already had started to come. So we came to Lowell in 1963. And we came to Lowell because my cousin married a girl from Lowell. So we could, if he had married a girl from Kansas City, we would have gone to Kansas City. And I think that's
that would have been Lowell's loss.
I think that's true of a lot of immigrants, you know, especially chain immigrants, where you go where your family is. So this is how I came to Lowell in '63, and I lived most of my adult life in Lowell. I've left, of course, to go to school or to go other places, but I consider myself a Lowellian.
Oh, for sure. That's always what we come back to.
Yeah.
Anybody who's come here, you make up the fabric.
Honorary or otherwise, right? I'm still a blow-in because I wasn't born here, but
Oh, we're so lucky to have you, though.
some people might think not, but that's okay.
Oh, that's ridiculous. But okay, so we talk a lot about refugees coming here, right? And obviously, the Armenian genocide was a great tragedy, as we see time and time again. Mm-hmm. And the long journey that you described coming, refugees, I don't think that people understand what it is to be a refugee. And the kind of things that you have to face in order to even just get to a place where you can settle. So why Lowell? Well, you said Lowell because of your family, but
I think the question, why Armenians in Lowell?
Yes,
right,
yes.
Right. And Lowell, like for Armenians, like for a lot of for immigrants during that time, it was jobs. So all along the East Coast, when Armenians came by boat, they came into New York, Providence, and it was easier to stay along the East Coast. So you go all the way up from New Jersey to Hartford to Providence and all Greater Boston, with in Lynn, with Watertown, where there was work that people could do. So Armenians came to Lowell. Actually, they started coming before the genocide, at the turn of the century, when the labor was needed. And like most immigrant groups, the men came first, started working, and then either brought their family if they had family, or had their family fix them up with somebody, something like that, and come here. So at the turn of the century, this already was a community in Lowell. In a way, it was fortunate for the relatives of the Armenians who were suffering from the genocide that there was a community
There's
here.
people here already.
Yeah, so they had a destination. Once they were able to be out of there, they had a destination. Again, it took a while to get here. Marseille was where I was born, was really the place where a lot of Armenians came and left. They went through Marseille. When I was born in Marseille, there was like, I think 12%, 14% of the city was Armenian. I went to a school where half the people were Armenian. I was brought up in an Armenian ghetto, like there were a lot. So Lowell was well known, because there was jobs, and like a lot of other immigrant groups, people from the same area go to the same city. Such and such person lives in Lowell, so they tell the kids, go to Lowell. If your family went to Lawrence, they say go to Lawrence. So the community was a little bit more, maybe not everybody wasn't related, but culturally and geographically they had already some ties. And within I would say within one generation, they were able to start establishing a community where people bought homes instead of living in tenements. They bought homes. A lot of them started businesses. And then after they started their businesses, they bought some land, moved out of the back Central Street where most of the Armenians came to.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah.
Most of the Armenians came to back Central Street, moved out to other areas in the city, eventually moved out of Lowell. So fast forward to today, the Lowell population of Armenians is small, but the greater Lowell population is large. And most of these people, when they say, they still consider Lowell to be the hub of the Armenian community. I mean, people who live in Westford don't think it's Westford. No, they say it's Lowell. Although, like I said, the population is small. Like a lot of immigrants, I think the children do a little bit better than the parents. They go to school, and then they want a different kind of lifestyle.
Right.
So when in the early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, when the first Armenians are coming along, as you said, along the East Coast, actually I'm remembering from what you wrote in my class, lots of people, so Watertown was one of the places that you already mentioned. That was one place where a lot of people
There was
went.
a huge wire company.
Yeah, and then there was another company here that was a company that did leather, I think.
Correct.
You said,
That's
right?
right.
And see, I'm remembering. Wow, good for me. And that a lot of people in Lowell got jobs in that particular factory too. So once people are here, were religious and/or cultural institutions started as well back in the early 20th century?
That's an excellent question. The church was not built. It was on Lawrence Street, so people could walk. It wasn't built till about late 20s, it began early 30s. But they would either rent a space or in their own home they would celebrate and commemorate, the different holidays. It was not until the church was built where you had a community center where people could go and do these things. So the building of the church, I think, was crucial for maintaining, keeping the community together. Because how long can you go to somebody's house? As the community was growing, they did have Armenian classes in people's homes. They would have picnics or they would travel to other communities. But it was not, like again, I think it's not so much that I'm promoting the church, but the building itself, having a center, I always felt is very important for immigrants. Those immigrants who come to Lowell and have some place to go, I think maintain their community much stronger than those that don't have a building, whether they rent it or they own it.
Right, the importance of maintaining cultural ties, knowing what's going on back home maybe, and just exchanging, right, information socially, and just being together, that feeling of togetherness in a place where maybe it's not necessarily your place, but you're making it yours.
Right.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we see that dramatically in, like across in the Acre where you've got the Greek church and the Catholic church right across the canal from each other, and you've got the French-Canadian Catholic church just a couple blocks over, and so it seems like that's, again, every particular place people leave from has its own unique story, I think, in terms of what propels people to go, what war, famine, whatever it would be, genocide, all the different stories, right, that cover all the people. And yet there are certain similarities when people arrive.
I think a lot of similarities.
Yeah, that to me it's like a very interesting roadmap of like what makes people comfortable.
Yeah.
And you can definitely, you can see that in all these different places in the city.
Now,
so in the 60s, when the population was pretty large in Lowell, a building was bought on Liberty Street, and that became a cultural center for some of the Armenians, not all of it. I'm not going to go into the history of internal issues of Armenians because I think it's the same thing we see in so many other ethnic groups.
Right,
so, I took 2 years ago, I took one of Dick Howe's walks, what's called Greek Town, and the person explained why there's 4 Greek churches, or there were 4 Greek churches. So same, I mean, it repeats, history repeats itself with every group. So on Liberty Street, that's where the center was, and it stayed that way. And people who have moved out would bring their children and grandchildren there because, again, to celebrate Armenian Christmas or to celebrate Lenten dinner or to commemorate events, you need a center. And I know I'm probably repeating myself, but if any immigrant group wants to maintain some kind of existence, getting your own place is important.
It's extremely important for the culture and for the people coming. Do you think, because we've seen this with other cultural groups, when the second and third generations start becoming a part of the community, is there a little bit of resistance in being a part of their own culture?
Yes, there is. But there's such a compelling story about being Armenian. We've been around forever. There's a homeland. It's interesting. So often what we see is those who marry non-Armenians. The non-Armenian becomes a little bit more attractive because there's something of a major substance there, and so yes, but that occurs. People want to go away and then they come back. Mm-hmm. I see that the older you get, the more you want some kind of identity with people, and so those who have done other things at some point in their life, I think, stop and reflect and say, who am I and where have I come from?
Or maybe I wish I would have participated more when my mom was trying to make me.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, in my I'm teaching immigration history to undergrads this semester, and I gave them all an assignment that they had to go and talk to their grandmothers and grandfathers, or if there was great-grandmother or somebody as far back as they could go, and then they were going to come to class and tell the story of how they all ended up here. And it was really funny because when I gave the assignment, they were all groaning and mumbling, oh, what are I going to do? And then after they came in and did it, they all thanked me, because for a lot of them, they heard stories they had never heard before because they never bothered to ask. Mm-hmm. And it was the same in my family, which is from Quebec and Ireland and Italy. Unless you asked, they didn't necessarily volunteer. If it was a struggle, if they came, and they were really poor when they got here and it was hard to carve out a life, they're not necessarily going to tell you that if you don't ask, right? And so so almost to a person, they said, thank you so much for doing this. Yeah. But they also all said, my mother thought I was weird when I started asking her about where we came from. So again, it was like, it's like a really, it's a interesting sort of byplay, right, between the generations to try to...
Especially people who come out of trauma, the first generation, you're right, they never volunteered anything, almost as if they wanted to leave that behind, as if, And the second generation was trying just to figure out who they are in this new land, the parents don't speak English, so it became the third generation that became really the ones that said, wait a second, what's going on here, But it takes 3 generations.
They could be the ones to do the family tree, right?
Yeah, they're the ones who started becoming vocal, and asking for, what was this done to us? Why is no one punished? No, so it takes a couple of generations when you come out of trauma like this.
Right. Yeah, and then, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going. Okay.
I was going to just say that we've seen it even in, I'm thinking like the Cambodian culture. Right. I remember I went to a play at MRT that described exactly that. They were maybe second or third generation, and their parents had come from the Khmer Rouge, and the mother didn't want to talk about being a refugee, and I think they did a really great way of showing how kids become a part of the American culture, and they resist their own culture a little bit, but then when things happen in the family, they want to know more about that trauma and why their parents are the way they are, or why they emphasize things like the importance of getting an education, or being the best that you could be, because this is where we came from, and
when you stop having the immigrant mentality, that I'm a foreigner in this land. When you say, well, this is my land too, then I think you can go and start figuring out who you are and where you came from, and But I have to say, when I came to Lowell in '63, there was no ESL, none of this stuff. But it was such a welcoming community for an immigrant. It was the teachers couldn't have been nicer. The fellow students, the neighbors. I don't know what has happened. I'm not saying Lowell's not a welcoming community. On the contrary, we're unique in that sense. But I don't see it out there. I mean, when I came, people couldn't have been nicer. I couldn't speak English. Everybody was trying to be helpful. It was just oh, look, somebody from another country.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's a unique characteristic of Armenian immigrants, because I think historically we've seen that those groups who come in, and maybe because you've already had kind of a presence here, it was different because other groups face extreme prejudice and discrimination, and then became those groups that also dealt with.
I think I came in the right time as immigrants. I think people saw immigrants as revitalizing the community, something interesting. People, now of course a lot has changed.
I mean, in the early 60s, you're coming right at the moment where this is when President John F. Kennedy has articulated that he wants to change all the restrictions on immigration. He wants to get rid of the immigration quotas put in place in 1924, which we've talked about here before. And so he's become a champion in a way of sort of opening the country up. It's also connected in a way to the history of the Cold War, and the United States in the rest of the world has sort of a black eye in that there are all these civil rights issues in the country, and as well, the Soviet Union is going around saying to different countries in the world, don't think they're your friend. Look what happens to, they don't even want to let people in from China or Asian countries or India or anywhere else. And so for foreign policy and other reasons, the country opens up. But when you came, so in the early 60s when you came, you would have had help, and I know this partly because I've seen the photo of your sister standing in front of the International Institute as a young girl. So the International Institute helped you to sort of become acclimated to Lowell.
It was not only language, but they would teach you cultural things, because as a lot of immigrants would say, it's just not the language, but cultural references that you don't know anything about. Thanksgiving, I mean, what is Thanksgiving about? The food you've never seen. I think for a child, an immigrant child, that's just as important as the language. Or they'll make reference to a television show, or something they read when they were in second grade, which you did not read. So the International Institute at the time was not only helpful with the language, but more with cultural things. There were everybody was an immigrant in the group, so from different countries, Portugal, Puerto Rico. I know at least a lot of Portuguese. So it was comfortable. Not that my classmates did not make me feel comfortable, but this was a little bit more comfortable.
Well, you shared a commonality of being different, right?
Right.
What's one thing that if you can remember that was kind of culturally shocking for you coming here?
I came from France, southern France, where the cuisine is outstanding. It was the food. It all has changed. It has changed drastically. American cuisine is excellent. The wines are excellent. But when we came, it was a little bit shocking. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I think I know some kids who still complain about that.
And you could not bring your own food to lunch, because people would say, "What is this?"
Yeah.
So, but that. From a kid's point of view, that was probably the most shocking thing.
Absolutely. I had a friend who said that too, and I believe she's Japanese-American, but she was telling me a story about being one of the few people of color in her school and bringing her lunch that was from her culture and being very ashamed to eat it, because everybody was like, what is that? Why do you have something like seaweed or something, right? It's like, this is unheard of.
Probably had a different smell.
Exactly.
All kinds of things that would sort of make everybody look, right?
And television was also shocking, that you had all these stations and you had all these kinds of programs. It's shocking in a good way, because it was great. It was all entertainment, a lot of entertainment. So, but again, from a kid's point of view.
Right. That must have been, wow. I can't even imagine that, because, well, I grew up here, right? But
yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when we've done oral histories with people, one of the things that a lot of people comment on is they think, and so this is even more recent, like say 80s and 90s, and even now, say in the last 10 years, people have, a lot of newcomers have the impression that everybody in America is rich, right? Because what you see, if you see any TV, or what you see if you see a movie, there's hardly ever anything about working class people, or there's not like that representation on TV or whatever. And so one of the things that that students have always said to me when I ask them that same question you just asked, like what surprised you? That will usually be one, that there is such a disparity in standards of living and housing, and so the differences between like riding around Lowell and seeing housing and then, you know, riding to Andover or something like that, or just like, wait, you know, or going up into New Hampshire and seeing like just trees and lakes, and like around here you just see buildings, right? That those disparities are not things they come prepared to understand.
The picture, when I was a little younger, then I was 10 years old when we came, but when I was younger, people would talk about America, adults, and they would all say, you know, money grows on trees, in French that. And I literally thought that I was going to come to the United States and pull dollars off trees. You know, but you're right. You have that Hollywood image, and now things have changed because the world has become much smaller. But those days, everything was Hollywood. You know, these beautiful colors. You know, and then the women were beautiful, the men were handsome. You know, so you're right.
Yeah, and it's funny because money. There were a lot of posters back in the early 20th century in port cities where people would be leaving that would show America, and the image would be a tree with money hanging off of it, right? But I mean, one of my mother's favorite expressions always when we asked for something was, "You think money grows on trees?" And so she's the daughter of Italian immigrants, right? And so that's her expression back to me as the next generation. You think money grows on trees? And so it is funny to hear when people come sort of with that.
But you know, people come here because there is more opportunity. And especially when we came, that was the era where people really came to have a better life. And again, you know, coming to Lowell, there was still a lot of jobs. Lowell had, you know, the manufacturing was still very active. So you could be, you know, untrained or whatever, you could be, and find a job. It's not the case anymore because the economy has changed. But those days, people wanted immigrants to come because they still had a lot of jobs. So maybe that's part of the whole issue we have now. But I always consider myself lucky and fortunate that we came here. I said, how lucky was it that we came here as opposed to somewhere else?
So in the photograph that from the Institute that has your sister in it, there's another Armenian boy with her, right? And when we emailed back and forth about the photograph, you said his family went back to France. So was that something that was maybe not typical, but something that did happen?
Yes, it wasn't typical, but it did happen. Primarily, you know, if you come here and your family's still there, like the mother's family was still there. So after a while, it becomes difficult. Or, you know, yeah, you're working, but you know, you're not rolling in dough. You know, things are okay, they're not great. So your future doesn't seem as great as you thought it was going to be. And you know, you say, well, do I want to stay here without my family, or do I want to go back and take another chance? So there were people who went back. A lot of people left Lowell, went to California, a lot, because that's where a lot of the Armenians had gone. But it was like, let's see if this works out better for me, that kind of thing.
But still staying in the U.S.
It's still, yeah, but it was, okay, this is not working for me for whatever reason. I need to be near more Armenians, or I need to be in a warmer place.
Yeah, away from the cold,
right? I came from a warmer place. I can't stand it here. Yeah, if California was not there, would these people go back? Perhaps some would go back to somewhere else that they came from. Also, what happened to Armenians as the Middle East was going through the turmoil in the 60s and 70s and 80s, a lot of Armenians, after they left the homeland, like my grandparents went to Syria and then to Lebanon, but a lot of them stayed there. You know, the Syrian people were very welcoming, so wasn't the Lebanese people. And they were going through their own changes, you know, the end of the Ottoman Empire, the establishment of the countries. But when the turmoil began in the Middle East, really began with Egypt at the turn of the century, Armenians left Egypt. a lot of them did not come here. A lot of them went to Canada. But after Canada, some came here. The biggest wave that came was when the Lebanese Civil War began. So a lot of Armenians who had relatives, they would, even second cousins, they would bring them here. The great majority that came from Lebanon, Iran, and later Syria.
So this would have been in the 70s and 80s?
80s. I did not stay in Lowell. They came to Lowell, and because the family was here, perhaps stayed a year and a half to get their feet on the ground, and they moved to California. So Lowell did not have that renaissance of Armenians like Watertown had. A lot of them stayed in Watertown. Providence had, and then but the majority, or Detroit or Chicago, but the majority that came to Lowell, actually I probably all went to California. So again, it was not helpful to maintain the community because they went again to California where I think there's more Armenians in California than in Armenia. I'm not sure, but the weather, the opportunities, the culture, it's a great state for immigrants, so they left.
And people could have come in the 1970s and 80s initially to Lowell because having a population here with changes in the immigration laws from 1965, family reunification was now in place.
That's so why they came here.
If you were here, you could bring your grandmother and your grandfather, or like close, not like eighth cousin removed or something like that, but you could definitely bring a pretty large segment of your family if you wanted to.
Right, that's exactly what they did. These people also came with a little bit of resources because they already had been living in wherever country for a couple generations. So the moment they got a feel for the lay of the land, California, here I come.
That's what my daughter said when she graduated. California, here I come.
See you later, Dad.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really great that we have, even though it's a smaller population of Armenians, I know a few who are around my age who are still so proud of their culture. And I think it really speaks to that that cultural maintenance, right? And Lowell being such a welcoming place to have that, to be able to create those spaces and to continue to integrate people into the community while still being able to be proud of where they've come from.
Yeah, Lowell's, I have to say before we finish up, the Lowell government, the Lowell people were extremely welcoming. The city gave us a piece of land next to City Hall, where the monuments are. And in 2015, on the 100th anniversary of the genocide, we were able to pull a monument. But it's the kind of city we live in, so it was very nice.
Right. I think it's so great too, just to hear such a positive light from the past with Lowell and immigrants. Even though we have been a welcoming place for a while, and it is welcoming week right now, right?
Oh, you're right.
So I'm really glad to have you on the show today to be able to speak to how welcoming Lowell has been for you and the success that you found here, and all of the wonderful Armenians who make up the great community of Lowell, and that we could be that for everyone here. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks.
And thank you all for tuning in to History in Lowell.